Ladies and gentlemen, thank God for Mississippi. That's how I've always felt. I grew up in Mississippi. I've lived here. I've traveled all over the world. No place I want to be. I love Mississippi, and I thank God for Mississippi. Yes, thank you. That's worth a round of applause. And I was on the internet about 5 years ago, just, searching for data, and I actually found a Wikipedia article that said, thank God for Mississippi. And when you first see the heading, you think, great, other people are saying it too. And then you read the article and you find out that it says, this is what other states are saying because it keeps them from being last in the rankings. I thought, that's not okay. That's not okay. So it started a quest. I launched a website with the generous funding of Jim Barksdale and others. I launched a website called outoflastplace.com, outoflastplace.com, to get to the bottom of what rankings and how and why are we where we are. And the initial stage of research is to figure out what ranking are we going to measure. We came to the conclusion that per capita income was the most universal measure of human wealth and prosperity. It's a very simple measure. It is what is the average income of a group of people. You can take any group of people, add up their total income, divide it by the total number of people, and you have the per capita income of that group of people. And you can do that across time, you can do that across geographies, etc. So I had per capita income, so the next thing I needed to do was graph the data. So I pulled all the way back to 1929 per capita income statistics for all 50 states. And I graphed it all out on this big long graph, and then I looked at Mississippi and tracked it all the way back from the present all the way back. And it turns out Mississippi has been last in per capita income every single year for 90 years now. So I thought, okay, that's not okay. What are we going to do about that? That's not a view we want to look at, right? I mean, who wants to be behind Arkansas and South Carolina and Alabama and even little West Virginia here? Come on. We can't be behind West Virginia. So what are we going to do? Well, the first thing when you're trying to solve a problem like that, you got to zoom in on the problem, right? So you zoom in and say, what is that gap? Well, it turns out that Mississippi line, the next up, ranked 49th, is West Virginia. And we are about $4.8 billion in income behind West Virginia on a per capita basis. So let me break that down one step farther. $4.8 billion, we need essentially a $4.8 billion bridge to get from 50th to 49th. Now here's the good news though. The good news is the steps past 49th are much smaller. So if we can go from 50th to 49th, it's actually much easier then to get from 49th to 48th to 47th and climb the rungs of the ladder. We need a $4.8 billion bridge. Break it down a step farther. We have 3 million people in Mississippi. 4.8 billion, little math. We need $1,600 per person in order to bring our per capita income above West Virginia, which will cause Wikipedia to launch a new article called Thank God for West Virginia, which is exactly where we need to be. So that doesn't sound insurmountable or even necessarily that hard until you realize that's on a per capita basis for every man, woman, and child, which means for a family of 4, that's $6,400 in income that we need to increase in order to surpass West Virginia. So positive thinking alone is not going to get there. We can't just look in the mirror and think we see something we don't see. And blame shifting will also not get to where we need to be. So the purpose of this talk today is Mississippi myths. In the process of researching and publishing content on outoflastplace.com, I came across 4 myths that people believe about Mississippi and Mississippi's economics, and that have been believed for even decades, that are just not true. And so I thought, what better time to lay these out and play Mythbusters once and for all for 4 of the most commonly believed myths about Mississippi. So let's dive right in. First myth number 1. Let's start with an easy one. But if you factor in our cost of living, ... Well, it turns out actually Mississippi does, according to the Bureau of Economic Analysis, have the lowest cost of living in the United States. The problem is our incomes the gap in incomes are actually just a little larger than the gap in cost of living, meaning when you factor in cost of living for all 50 states, it does close some of the gap between 50th and 49th. Unfortunately, it does still leave us in 50th place. So we can't just look in the mirror and say, we have low cost of living, it doesn't matter. It helps, but it does not change the ranking. So let's crumble that one up, throw it away, and go on to myth number 2. This is where it really starts to get real. Okay, it's the delta. It's the delta. When people say it's the delta, they're typically referring in the northwest corner of the state to the 15 to 18 counties that comprise the delta. And for decades now in Mississippi, people have been saying, you know, if you just took the delta out of Mississippi, we'd rank like 25th. We'd rank in the top third. We'd be amazing. All of our problems, if it's just the delta. Well, ladies and gentlemen, if you take the delta entirely out of the state of Mississippi, we will move from 50th to 50th, ladies and gentlemen. What progress? Now, I have to explain the math on this one because people don't believe me. The delta accounts for about 10% of the state's population, right? It's just a very low population area. And the incomes in the delta are only about 10% lower than the rest of the state. So when you have a region of the state that is 10% of 10%, then when you take it out of the state, your per capita income goes up by 1%, 10% of 10%. Problem is, we are 5 percentage points behind West Virginia. So when you take the delta out, one of those 5 percentage points goes away, leaving exactly 80% of your problem behind. So the 15 to 18 counties that comprise the delta, there are actually 4 times as many counties not in the delta that would rank 50th if they were individual states than the counties that are in the delta. So again, just like cost of living, it's not that there's not some element in there, it's just that the next time somebody blames the delta, ask them about the other 80% of the problem, which is everything that's not in the delta. To give you an example of where every single county would rank if it was an individual state, we have 1 county that would rank 5th, 1 that would rank 41st, 2 that would rank 48th, 4 that would rank 49th, and the rest would rank 50th. That means we have 74 of our 82 counties would rank 50th if they were individual states, meaning their per capita income is lower than West Virginia, therefore they would rank 50th. Okay? So clearly there's a lot of red on this map that's not in the delta, exactly about 80%. So again, it's not the delta, ladies and gentlemen. We can crumple that up and throw it away. Myth number 3. Sometimes when people say the delta, what they actually mean is a broader category of race. And sometimes they think that Mississippi is in last place because we have a higher percentage of African American populations than any other state. And we are 50th ranked. And people would, because they don't do the research and study the math, assume that these two things must be automatically connected. Well, ladies and gentlemen, again, data can tell us that because what we can do is we can find out if that's true or not by running what-if scenarios, as in what if our demographics matched another state. So for example, what if we swap places with Louisiana, which only has a 32% African American population? Turns out we're still 50th. What if we swapped with South Carolina, which is 27% African American? Still 50th. Even if we swapped all the way down to Virginia, which has an African American population half the size of Mississippi, we would still be 50th. Same if we swapped with Georgia, same if we swapped with Alabama. You see, the reason this is true is because all of our races don't make enough money in Mississippi. It's not a black and white problem. Our white people don't make enough money. Our African American population don't make enough money, and our other population don't make enough money. We are all in this together. And guess what? We're trying to beat West Virginia, which just so happens to be the 4th whitest state in the United States. Look at that, 93% white, and they're just barely ahead of us. And it's not for reasons of race, it's for other reasons. So the next time somebody says the problem is the delta, it's not true. The next time somebody says the problem is race, it is not true. Again, we're playing Mythbusters here. We can crumple that one up and throw it away. All right, so where do you go if somebody says we're still 50th ranked and its cost of living doesn't fix that and it's not region and it's not race? The natural human inclination is to blame somebody, right? We've got to blame somebody. It must at least be poor people. Maybe they're poor people across race and maybe they're poor people across region, but we've got to blame somebody, and so the go-to place is the problem is poor people. Low incomes equals poor people, right? It makes sense. Well, again, we can look at data to find out if that is true. When you look at income statistics, incomes are broken into quintiles. That means fifths, which means the lowest 20% of income earners, the next lowest, the 20% in the middle, the next 20%, and the highest 20%. So the question is, who's actually responsible for the missing income, right? We need $4.8 billion to get out of last place. Who's not making the money? Well, if you look at the lowest income Mississippians as compared to the same 20% in surrounding states, it is true that the average Mississippian on a per capita basis makes $1,382 less per capita than the same people in our surrounding states. It is also true that that accounts for exactly 4% of the missing income. So what about that next group? That next group makes $3,000 less per person, which accounts for about 9%. Our middle class makes about $4,000 less per person, accounts for 13%. Middle to high income earners, about $6,000 less per person than the same group of people in surrounding states, accounts for 18%. And our highest 20% of income earners accounts for $19,000 in per capita income, and that accounts for 56% of the income gap. You see, ladies and gentlemen, when you're allocating a problem, when you're looking for somebody to blame, the reason you can't blame the delta is only 10% of the people live there. The reason you can't blame the poorest 20% is the percentage of the income that's being made up by that group of people is just not that different on a dollar basis as compared to surrounding states. The truth is, when you look at income, we all need to make more money. Okay? We all need to make more money. At all income levels, at all races, and at all regions of the state. And these statistics hold up whether you're looking at just money income, whether you add into it government transfer payments. This analysis holds up the same regardless. So the biggest myth of all for the last 200 years in Mississippi is that only some of us are to blame for where we are and how we rank. And as long as we believe that, we always have a reason to do nothing because it's always not our fault. That has been a myth in Mississippi for 200 years. And it's a myth that has held Mississippi back because it allows people to blame other people, which keeps us from coming together to come up with solutions that work for all of us. That does not need to be a myth for the next 200 years because today at TEDxJackson, we are myth-busting those 4 myths that have been holding us back for 200 years. We do have big challenges in the state of Mississippi. There is a $4.8 billion income gap. And we do need to build that bridge. That bridge must be built with big solutions and big solutions that affect everyone. But they have to be big solutions that affect the rich and the poor, urban and rural, black and white, young and old. We're not going to solve this by blame shifting. We have got to solve it by finding solutions that affect all of us. In this talk, it is my hope that it has become clear that when you look at the facts and when you look at the data and you dig in, there is one fact that stands above them all and dispels all of the myths, ladies and gentlemen. And that is that together in Mississippi is the only way up. Thank you all.